I have this little piece of paper I keep in my journal, and I read it every morning, and I sometimes more than once in the day. And it's, you know how paper gets. This is so old, it's starting to fall apart. But I read it. It's a quote from Léon Blois' book, La Pauvre Femme. The only real sadness, the only real failure, the only great tragedy in life is not to become a saint. And I know that many of you have heard that before or read it, you're familiar with it. But I noticed something different happen to me as I started reading it regularly. And so every day to look at this, think about it, is starting to work on me. And it really brings home the fact that whatever our life is here, whatever we've done or whatever, if we don't end up with God forever, what is the point? Our life has been pointless. And of course, it brings the question, what is a saint? And we have a couple of definitions, you might say, of descriptions of a saint in the scriptures tonight. One is at the end of the section from Revelation we heard. These are the ones who have survived the time of great distress. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. If we're familiar enough with Scripture, we can figure out what that means, and it does have meaning. But it's a little distant in a way. And then we have in the Psalm 24, another maybe description out of it. You know, who can climb the mountain of the Lord? Who can stand in his holy place? The man with clean hands and pure heart, who desires not worthless things. And that's a little more down to earth for us. But I like C.S. Lewis's definition. He says, a saint is someone who can live comfortably with God forever. Unless you think that's too simple or too non-theological, think about this. What was the first thing that Adam and Eve did when God comes walking in the cool of the evening, it says, in the garden, after their disobedience? They hide from God. They don't want to be in God's presence with this thing on their conscience. And I'm sure you've experienced this. You've done something wrong, maybe, or you upset somebody, and it's uncomfortable being with them until you've apologized or until the misunderstanding has been worked out or whatever, then you can be comfortable with each other again. And how can someone who is comfortable with lying be in the presence of all truth? How can someone, if we look at the gospel, notice these aren't commandments, right? Thou shalt be meek. Jesus is just saying the meek will be blessed. How can someone who is not meek, someone who is willful, determined, self-involved, feel comfortable being in the presence of the meek one? How can someone who refuses to forgive or refuses to give mercy to people, how could they possibly be comfortable in the presence of the divine mercy? And the more you dig at it, the more, at least for me, C.S. Lewis's description of saints rings true. And it spurs me on to try to be pure of heart, try to be meek, humble, forgiving, merciful, truthful, whatever. Not just so I can be those things, or, not that I'm trying to climb some mountain of goodness or something, but because I want to be able to be in God's presence. And notice, it's not just that I want to be in God's presence. That is certainly important. But I want also to be able to be in God's presence comfortably. And so, as simple as it is, I suggest to you that something worth pondering. And every day that I read this makes me evaluate my life a little bit differently. And I start thinking in terms, and you know me well enough to know right and wrong they're fine. It's a fine way to live. It's a good thing to strive for. Right? But I guess it's when I think about being able to be comfortable in the presence of God, that brings home to me the relational aspect between me and God, that I'm in a relationship with God. It's not just some great and powerful odds that I'm trying to please or something. Scripture is clear that God desires us to be with him. And Scripture is also clear that God has stopped at nothing to make it possible for us to be with him. And so for our part, let us think about how much we desire to be with God. And let's try to be people who will be able to be with God, who will be comfortable in the presence of God forever. And it really is true. The only real sadness, the only everlasting sadness is not to be a saint. The only real failure in our lives is if we fail to become a saint. And the only great tragedy, amidst all the tragedies that we might experience, the only great and lasting tragedy is not to become a saint.